Welcome to the Spectrum Lounge podcast, where we discuss creatives of color disrupting the game in TV, film, and pop culture. I'm your host, Rebecca Theodore-Vachon, and on this episode, we chat with writer-director Joe Robert Cole about his new Netflix original film, All Day and a Night. Take a listen.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday.
So thank you for taking the time to speak to me about this movie. I screened it, and it was I was thinking about this movie like all night and preparing for this interview, and there's so much to ingest about this movie. So for my first question, I wanted to ask you, there's this a recent series called Little Fires Everywhere. And in one of the episodes, Kerry Washington's character is speaking to this very privileged white woman, and she says to her, you didn't have good choices, you were given good choices. I wanted to know, when you were writing this story, how much of that statement applied to Jakor and the other characters and their circumstances?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's cool. I think it applies. I think it absolutely applies. And this is how one of the things that the character of Jakor is grappling with or struggling with when he's in the film is the idea of realizing the walls placed around him and his community outside of prison, the kind of systemic walls and generational walls that he's facing, aren't that different than the walls he's facing inside the prison. And this idea of how, as a African American, you're constantly kind of struggling against limitations that have been set in your path of generationally. And so, one of the lines in the voiceover is talking about making prison into a life. And, African Americans have endured, I think, and in many cases thrived in this country, despite the country being built on our enslavement. We're survivors. But the question he's asking is, have we ever really been free to just live? Free of institutional racism, free of racist policies, free of microaggressions, free of subconscious bias. And I feel like there's a connectivity to the quote that you brought up, and the idea of this kind of tragedy of being forced to make prison into a life as an African American, that I think is at the heart of Ja's struggle, and also maybe what Kerry Washington's character is speaking to in what she said.
Right. So when we open with this movie, the audience is introduced to Jakor when he commits this really terrible and violent act. So as a writer, how do you have viewers have empathy for this character? They've seen him do this very despicable thing, and very much in the beginning of the movie. So how do you, as a writer, work to have audiences have that faith to make that journey with Jakor, to not shut him out, but to actually take the journey to kind of uncover the layers of what led him to this act?
Well, it's that is by design. So the film is tough by design. The goal, the journey that I wanted the audience to take in the film was to go from someone that we struggle to see the humanity in, to humanize them, right? So to humanize someone we often see struggle to see the humanity in. And so that is the journey I wanted to take people on. I wanted to start with a character that we would view as unredeemable, and then show that he is a redeemable human being by peeling back the layers of his life. So it's to show he's the sum of his parts and not the end result. So in a lot of ways, it's a leap of faith that I'm taking with the film, because the natural inclination is to not start a film or have a film be told through the point of view of a character like Ja. But the film is tough by design, and it's asking a lot of the audience on purpose. You know, that's the purpose of it. I'm asking you to enter a world where hope is scarce for 2 hours, where the fear of violence and the emotional toll on the character surviving in the world of the story at times can feel suffocating. But it's asked this to in order to kind of create a sense of what it might feel like to walk in these characters' shoes. And so it's asking us to try to connect with the humanity of characters who we might not normally consider in that regard. And to accomplish that, I tried to the best of my ability to create an authentic depiction of what's happening within the framework of a crime story and the psychological and human costs of that. So the journey I want the audience to take is a tough one, which can be a lot to ask, but I think if you stick with it, I feel like it's a worthwhile journey.
Right. So I know there's certain scenes that are certainly very difficult to watch and to witness. And the one scene where we see the flashback where JD, his father, is beating young Jakor. Can you tell us a little bit about shooting that scene that day? What were the conversations that you had with Jeffrey Wright and the actor that played younger Jakor, and just like blocking that scene? Like, what was the feeling on set that day?
That was a tough scene. That was a tough scene to I think for all of us, except Jalen. Jalen Hall. Jalen he's an amazing young actor because he's so different than Jakor. He brightens every room he's in. So we would have these heavy moments, these heavy scenes, and then when it's over, he's like bouncing off the walls, laughing, talking. You know, but for all of us adults, you know, it was, you know, it is a traumatizing moment in the film. And, you know, we approached it, since I tried to approach it with a level of sensitivity. Jalen's mom was there, made sure she was comfortable with everything we were doing, made sure that he was, you know, he wasn't in any harm, you know, he couldn't be harmed in any way by what we were doing. There were certain tricks that we were pulling. He was obviously not being hit or anything like that. And so, but, you know, watching through the viewfinder, you can see the impact, the kind of visceral nature of it. And Jeffrey, as Jeffrey does, was amazing and brought to the character an authenticity in watching Jeffrey, it felt, you know, what came through to me was that he thought he was doing something good for his son, and that is the real tragedy of it, right? And I think and so, you know, that humanity of that moment through him is, I think, what we tried to capture in all of the difficult moments of the movie. How would Jeffrey's character view his behavior, and not how maybe we see it from the outside, and rooting ourselves in that, again, in the empathy, trying to empathize with the characters in that way.
Right. And that scene was especially, while difficult to watch, it was actually fascinating to me too, because it was sort of like this discussion of Black masculinity, right? Because JD is beating Jakor because he feels that I'm going to toughen you up, right? Because I want to be a man. And on the other hand, on JD's side, and this was something that I found very unique, is this discussion of, because JD was a lighter skinned Black man, that in his own community, you know, we tend to see lighter skinned Black men as softer and feminine. And so it was like this very performative this performance for him to show that he was tough and that he was hard. Where did that idea come from, or what made you decide to want to talk about that?
I mean, well, it exists. It is. I have a big extended family, and there's some that are real light and some that are real dark, and and growing up in communities of color, you understand that dynamic that exists, and I also think me and Jeffrey had a conversation about it, about JD and him as Ja's father, based on how light he is versus Ashton's darker complexion, and talking about what that means. And obviously, like I said, in my own family, there's brothers and not aunties and uncles that are light and darker. So it can happen and it exists, but the idea of how that makes JD feel as a man, and how that manifests in these kind of traditional stereotypical gender roles, right? The kind of overly aggressive. I'm going to prove that I'm black by being by beating him. That speaks not only to the issue of color, but it also speaks to the lineage of slavery and the lineage of violence that can be drawn back through our community in some facets of our community, I should say.
Okay. Because one of the things I really loved about the movie is that there would be like these moments of beauty and peace, and then it would just be pierced by like this sudden violence. And I think about Stunna's birthday party, like that scene with the street party. That was beautiful. I loved it. And so 2 questions. I wanted to know, like, one, how did you go about creating that scene? Just like the camera movements and the production designs of that. Like I think of the bike that had the lights with the speaker, and then all of a sudden the shootout happens. But how did you put that scene together?
So they're called sideshows, and they started in East Oakland in the 80s, and they're pretty unique to the Bay Area. I knew very early on how I wanted the sequence to play out. It was about finding the right location and the right way technically to accomplish the continuous shot that I envisioned. So we found our spot, and then I worked on the placement of the elements with little model cars and people on this schematic in my office. And then we did some camera tests and some stunt tests. Our stunt coordinator, Danny Boyer, was a tremendous help to us. And, trying to get the camera between 2 moving cars safely was obviously and definitely a challenge in doing that properly. But I think the scene was made by all of the people who came out. Many of them brought their cars to be in the film. Shooting any oneer like that takes time and coordination. You're trying to make sure the camera is picking up certain things along the route. And if you're missing something, you kind of got to start from scratch. So they never let their energy drop. They were patient, and they really captured the spirit and electricity that I was after. And a lot of them have been to sideshows, so they knew what the experience was. It was tons of local people. And one of the things I tried to do with the movie, and specifically in the sideshow scene, was to really capture that sense of authenticity. And the guy on the bike, he's known in the Bay. Like, he's a local guy that we asked if he would be willing to be our focal point. That bike is known in the Bay. And so, having him be a part of the scene, the BART train that goes by at the beginning of that, when they get out to the street, it's a very distinct Bay Area thing, the BART train. And so just trying to find those nuances. Most and all of the slang in the background, I worked with our loopers to make sure that was very authentic and specific to Oakland. And so just really trying to root everything in the actual specific community was our goal there.
Right. So I know that the cinematographer for this movie is a woman,
Yeah.
Jessica Jenny. And I remember reading an interview with Ryan Coogler, and he was discussing having worked in all his films so far, he's worked with women cinematographers. And he said something to the effect of, it is actually for him, he felt that it was an asset working with women cinematographers because he, as a man, having a woman shoot the movie, they perhaps can see certain things or bring certain perspectives that even he could, might have a blind spot to or may not see. Did you find the same experience? What was it like working? Did you feel that you and Jessica, what was your working relationship like? And did you feel that she brought a certain perspective as a DP, both her technical skills and also being a woman cinematographer?
Well, I absolutely agree with him on that. My Jessica was a fantastic collaborator. She has an amazing eye for light and color and beauty and capturing humanity and being able to make a scene with practical lighting feel stylized and beautiful. The idea that the film doesn't, it feels grounded in a real space, but it still has this stylized feel to it. And that's something that she naturally she's gifted in that way. But certainly we would have lots of conversations about just our approach to not only specific scenes, but like overall approach. Our first conversation that we had, I think we talked for, it was an interview, but we talked for like 2.5 hours because we just were diving into a creative space that I knew she was the right fit for us. And I feel really fortunate. All of my department heads actually were women. My production designer, costume designer, Jessica, my cinematographer, my editor, hair and makeup, and mostly women of color. And that wasn't by mandate or some sort of, it wasn't something we were trying to do. We found the best fits for us creatively and technically. And it's great, specifically with a film like this that has, this underlying layer of misogyny that exists in the world that it lives in. To have that balance was even, I think, more helpful for me.
Great. And then my last question is, including this movie, we've seen a rise in Black films like Sorry to Bother You, Last Man in San Francisco, and Blind Spotting that are based in the Bay Area, particularly when we're talking about Black stories. Why do you feel, for yourself, why do you feel, or what is accounting for that specific demographic being kind of left out of the conversation in Black film? Because usually we'll see movies set in New York or Atlanta or in LA, but usually the Bay Area historically has never really been part of the conversation. What do you account for the rise, and how do you think that we can continue to bring more of the Bay Area into Black film?
Or has been in the past for, not seeing more
Right.
films set in the Bay.
Mhm.
Perhaps its proximity to Lost. I can say for me is I wanted to set the movie in a place that could at the same time feel really specific, but speak to communities dealing with similar issues around the world. And Oakland has a particular dialect, a particular way people carry themselves. It has its own rhythm, and it's a hard place to fake. And it has a rich history. It has a strong sense of community and family, and that uniqueness was what drew me to want to do my film there. And I imagine that might be the case with some of these other films as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.